Hello, I'm Ollie and this is Criminolly, where I talk about crime, pulp, horror, that kind of thing. Today, Westerns, it's my June of the Range wrap up. As I'm sure you already know, June on the Range was a wonderful month of reading Westerns in June, organised by Michael K. Vaughan. So there were a bunch of us hosting it, and I will try and remember to link to everyone's channels in the description for this. And loads of other people took part, outside of the hosts. So booktubers and subscribers, there was loads of interest in this event, which is fantastic because Westerns, whilst they are problematic in some ways, were an enormously important part of popular culture for decades. And I certainly found it really, really interesting reading a bunch of Westerns, which isn't something, I have not read many Westerns in my life. Outside of the Edge books, which I've been reading recently, I think I've probably read as many Westerns this month as I'd read in the preceding 49 years. So yes, it was good. I really, really enjoyed it. And I think I had 4 5-star reads out of the Westerns I read, which is a lot. That's definitely more than I would normally have in a month. So yes, wanted to do a wrap up for this, and I'm separating this out from my normal June wrap up. So I will do tomorrow on Saturday, I'll do a normal June wrap up where I'll talk about the non-Western books I read in June, but wanted to do a dedicated video for June on the Range because I enjoyed it so much. What I would say as well is I've seen a few people put up their June on the Range wrap-ups already, and they've been saying yeehaw and things like that and wearing cowboy hats and all that stuff. I'm not going to do any of that. I'm just going to talk about the books. So I read 10 books in total for June on the Range. I'm not going to go into massive detail on all of them because some of them don't really merit going into massive detail on, and 4 of them I've done video reviews on already, which are up on the channel. So I did a comparison review of the Riders of the Purple Sage by Zane and Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy, and then another comparison review, or not really a comparison, but a double header review of True Grit by Charles Portis and Shane by Jack Shaefer. But what I will do is talk briefly about the 10 books and give them to you in order from least enjoyed to most enjoyed. So without further ado, let's get started. So least favourite book of the month was Crossfire Trail by Louis L'Amour. So I've got a big stack of Louis L'Amour books. I did read another book by him a couple of months ago, which was pretty good, and this is fine. It's just some of the other, all the other Westerns clearly I read were better. But this is an enjoyable adventure. It's got all the kind of tropes you'd expect in a Western. He tells a good story. So this one starts off on a ship, and it's about a guy who's been shanghaied and then dies, but he passes on a message to one of his buddies on the ship to go back to his ranch and try and get his daughter out of this tricky situation she's in, basically, where there's these, this kind of evil cattle baron type of character who's trying to take the ranch from her. She believed her father had sort of run off and died. So the hero of the book, Rafe Karadec, gets to go back to her, help her fight the cattle baron, and tell her the truth about her dad. So yeah, it was enjoyable, but I found my attention kind of wandered a bit at times. It wasn't quite as taut as it could have been. Funnily enough, the bits that I enjoyed most were there was a gambling scene in particular, which was just fantastic. It was so tense, and it wasn't really like an action scene, but it was perfectly written. So I'm definitely going to try more Louis L'Amour because he's definitely got a talent both for storytelling and also for making individual scenes exciting. But yeah, it was my least favourite book of the month. Next up then was The Bounty Hunters by Elmore Leonard, which I read from this collection of his Westerns. So this was actually his first published novel, and I was a bit disappointed in it. I really like Elmore Leonard's crime fiction, and this was fine. So much like Crossfire Trail, It's got, you know, kind of a lot of the tropes you'd expect from a Western. It's got, you know, a couple of guys who are travelling to hunt down a rogue Native American. They go into Mexico to do that, so there's all sorts of competing forces against them and that kind of thing. And again, there are some individual scenes of action which are brilliant. There's a scene right near the start in a barber shop, which is incredibly tense, really, really exciting. But overall, again, like Crossfire Trail, I found my attention wandered a bit. It just didn't grip and entertain me quite as much as I expected it to. And as I say, I suspect part of that is down to the fact that I read a lot of Westerns this month. So I read 10 Westerns, and you know, most of them were excellent books, like really excellent books. So the books that were just okay, you know, felt a bit, you know, didn't have quite as much punch as a result of being compared to some really excellent books. But I'll definitely read the other two books in this series, and I've got a big collection of Elmore Leonard Western short stories as well. Next up, so this one was on Keno. Was on Kindle. It was Keno by TV Olsen, who is another, like L'Amour, a very productive and popular Western writer. And again, this was fine. The first 2/3 of it I really, really enjoyed. The last third just went a bit over the top. So it's about this guy, Keno, a young guy who's involved with these other kind of slightly shady characters, and they're trying to run a con basically on this rich mine owner who needs to transport a load of gold. So Keno and a buddy of his pretend to be agents from the insurance company that the guy has hired to, like, or is paying to insure the gold. So they're supposed to be there to make sure it gets transferred safely, whereas in fact what they want to do is rob it. So it was a really enjoyable kind of heist setup. But towards the end, it just went a bit over the top in terms of the melodrama, and, you know, weird coincidences and things like that. So I felt towards the end it lost it a bit. But again, it was entertaining, and if I'd read it, you know, not surrounded by so many great books, I might have enjoyed it a bit more. Next up then was a trashy, naughty Western. So not next up, but next in my list. So I enjoyed this slightly more than the three books I've talked about before. So this is Longarm and the French Actress from the Longarm series. So this is book 55, so a reasonably early entry in the series, because the series runs through over 300 books. So Longarm is like a sheriff, and in this book he is escorting and protecting the French actress, who is Sandra. I always get that wrong. Sarah Bernhardt, who's going on a tour across America. So Longarm, it kind of goes on the train with her and her entourage, and the book basically is him trying to kind of outthink and outsmart this gang of racists, basically, because Sarah Bernhardt's Jewish. So this gang of people who are trying to assassinate her because they don't approve of her being in the country. So he's trying to outsmart them whilst also sleeping with as many women as he can, basically. So there's lots of scenes of kind of light smut, as well as, you know, action and kind of detective work and things like that. So it's just a whole load of different stuff mixed up in there. It was really entertaining. Very, very enjoyable indeed. Okay, so slightly above Longarm, and to be fair, quite a long way above Longarm actually, was The Searchers by Alan LeMay from this Library of America edition of Westerns. So this was a 4-star read for me. The previous books I've talked about were all 3-star reads. So The Searchers was really, really good, but again, just not quite as good as some of the other books I read this month. So it's about so some Native Americans raid a farm, kind of in the frontier, and kill the men and carry off a young woman and a young girl. And it's about the kind of people who knew the family, who were, you know, kind of related to them in various ways, but who weren't present at the time of the raid, searching for those two women, the woman and the girl. And it starts at such a pace. The first kind of quarter of it is incredibly gripping really, really exciting. And one of the things that I felt was, so that's definitely a strength, and you are immediately immersed in the action, and it just grips you and does not let go. It slows down a bit after that, which I think was inevitable and kind of had to happen. There's no way the book could have kept up that pace. But at the same time, I felt that it lacked a little something once it slowed down. Now the final third really picks up again. The final third is excellent. But yeah, the middle part just felt a little bit too slow for me. There's lots of stuff of like the two main guys who were looking for the two missing people, just kind of wandering around and talking to people and stuff like that. And it works. And there's a lot of stuff about their relationship and their relationship with other people who've kind of survived the raid. But it just wasn't as gripping as that opening quarter, which was phenomenal. But as I say, it really does pick up again towards the end. And more than I think any of the other books I read this month, it really feels like it captures what life was like in the Old West. So there are such a range of different characters. The Native American characters, whilst there's definitely they are the aggressors, certainly at the start of the book, you do get a much more kind of level, kind of even picture of them as the book progresses, and you get lots of detail of kind of everyday life. So like parties and things like that, as well as the interaction between kind of civilians, if you like, and soldiers. There's all sorts of different stuff going on in this book, and I really did feel like I was experiencing a slice of what life would have been like that back then. So really, really interesting from that perspective. Definitely enjoyed it a lot. So slightly above that was Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy, which is completely different from everything else I read this month. So a Western written in modern times, so much newer than any of the other books. Well, I suppose Longarm is probably the newest one, apart from Blood Meridian. But yeah, just a brutal book about a young guy who's only ever called the Kid, who gets swept up with these people who are travelling down to Mexico to hunt Native Americans and claim scalps, basically. It's just a absolutely horrific book. The scenes of violence are A, incredibly graphic, but B, just incredibly well written, completely gripping. You cannot look away from the page. So definitely a brilliantly written book. The prose, and I have had problems with Cormac McCarthy's prose in the past, so when I read All the Pretty Horses by him, I didn't get on with it at all. But the prose in Blood Meridian, which is really kind of stripped down and sparse, works really, really well. And he kind of layers things on top of each other and on top of each other, and it just works brilliantly. A very well written book. And the central kind of antagonist character, the judge, who's this kind of almost otherworldly character who leads this band of people who are going around claiming scalps. It's just an unforgettable character. So yeah, a brilliantly written book. Slightly ahead of that, and partly because it was just a lot more entertaining and a lot less horrible, was Rise of the Purple Sage by Zane Grey. So one of those books that is considered to be kind of the genesis of westerns and a really important book in the genre. So that was just great fun. So a kind of land grab type story about disputes between this kind of group of not Quakers, Mormons. This group of Mormons and this young Mormon woman who has been so bold as to hire non-Mormons to work for her. And also this kind of old gunfighter character who comes back to help her. So a really entertaining book, and a wonderful kind of descriptions of landscape and things like that. So whereas The Searchers made me feel like I kind of knew what it was like to live in the Old West, Rise of the Purple Sage definitely evoked the landscapes of the Old West. So a really fascinating book from that perspective, and just really a really enjoyable Western. You can easily see why it was so influential. So slightly ahead of that one then, True Grit by Charles Portis, which was just wonderful. So a really good book. And I think any other month this probably would have been my favourite book of the month. So told from the perspective of this young woman, Mattie Ross, whose father has been killed, and who is trying to hire a gunman basically. So she hires this marshal, Rooster Cogburn, to travel with her to hunt down her father's killer and bring him to justice basically. And they team up with another guy who's also hunting for the same killer. Just beautifully written. Mattie Ross is a wonderful narrator, really dry, really funny. But just a really gripping story again as well. So fantastic action. The climax in particular was just brilliant. And then there's kind of an epilogue which is quite moving as well. So just a really wonderful book that I think anyone would enjoy, whether they think they like westerns or not. Slightly above that, and it was really close. So between these top three even, it was really close. But Shane by Jack Shaefer, which again was from this Library of America collection, which I slightly preferred to True Grit purely because it felt like a tighter story. So it's shorter, it's only like about 120 pages long, but it's just so the plot is so well constructed that it just pulls you along with it, and there isn't a spare word in the whole book. It's just really gripping and just unfolds perfectly. So again a land grab story. It's definitely a theme in westerns, about a family living on a farm, mum, dad and the son who's kind of 11 or 12 I think is the narrator of the book. There's again this kind of cattle baron type character who wants to take their land, and Shane is a kind of loner who turns up out of nowhere, gets hired by the dad to kind of work on the farm and do jobs and things like that, but is actually also a gunman and helps them to defend themselves against the cattle baron and his evil henchmen. But just, as I say, just beautifully plotted. So tightly done, fantastic scenes of action, but also just the relationship between Shane and the family is brilliantly done. Particularly between him and the boy, and the boy idolises him. Between him and the dad, they become really good friends, and between him and the mum, where there's this kind of there's a definite attraction between the two of them, but they're both really honourable about it and don't act on it. So there's all these different kind of relationships and tensions going on, as well as the kind of action and the main plot. So just all hangs together beautifully. I really loved it. And then my favourite book of the month. So I said, early on in the month, I thought this would probably be my favourite book of the month. And so it has continued to be. It was again from this volume, The Oxbow Incident by Walter Van Tilburg Clark, which is very different from the other westerns in that it doesn't really have that tighter plot, and it doesn't have really any action in it at all. And I know certainly one of my subscribers, DDB, struggled with it because of that. He just found it kind of slow and a bit dull, but I thought it was fantastic. And I know Greg at Another Bibliophile Reads really loved it as well. So it's a story about some cattle have been rustled basically, and one of the cowboys has been killed in that rustling of the cattle, and the townspeople band together to find the people who did this and bring them to justice. So basically they form a mob to lynch them, and it's told from the perspective of one of the townspeople who kind of gets swept up in it all, but who isn't a central character to it at all. He's just kind of an observer. And just a wonderful book about what can happen when mob mentality takes hold, and about the weight of the actions that we can take as individuals and groups, and how important it is that people stand up for what's right in that kind of situation. So a very powerful book, really gripping, really enjoyable, great characters, great dialogue in particular in it. Another just fantastic book, and felt to me like probably the most meaningful book of any of the books I read this month, and it very clearly had a message it was trying to get over, and it wasn't subtle about trying to get that message over, but sometimes that can be really effective, and it certainly was in this case. And it was a fantastic book. So The Oxbow Incident, my Walter Van Tilburg Clark, was my favourite Western of the month, and indeed my favourite book of the month. And what I wanted to do very briefly now, and I did do this to an extent in the video I did on True Grit and Shane, is just kind of reflect on the themes that came up again and again in Westerns, because there definitely were a number of things which, not necessarily in every single book, did you see all of these themes, but I think in pretty much every book you saw at least one of them, and often you saw multiple. So there's something about male friendships. So male friendships came up again and again and again. So True Grit, the Elmore Leonard one, the Searchers, Shane, they all had male friendships at the centre of the books, and often friendships between two men who are quite different from each other and had different ideas about things. So that was one thing. The idea of land ownership and a man's right to own his land and work his own land definitely came up a lot. So lots of stuff about disputes about land, be they between cattle barons and smallholders, or between settlers and Native Americans. So loads of stuff about that, and also just this real sense of duty and justice and that kind of thing. So a very different take on that in the Oxbow Incident than in some of the other books, but that was often a theme. So characters wanting to take retributive justice, if I've said that right, for wrongdoing that has been done to them or their loved ones. So True Grit is all about that. The Oxbow Incident is definitely about that. The Searchers is very much about that. So that was really a consistent theme as well, and also the power of of one person to make a difference. So often there are single, well, I say that with a caveat. So there are often single characters who are central to that like delivery of justice, if you like. But there was also consistently themes of people banding together. So I said, friendship was a really important part of a lot of these books. But in many of them, it was only by uniting that the people were able to get the justice they wanted. So Matty Ross had to team up with Rooster Cogburn and LaBeef, the other guy, in order to get what she wants. In the Bounty Hunters, we end up with two guys having to team up to get what they want. So definitely a consistent theme of individualism, but teamwork as well. So all of those things really felt like they were consistent through pretty much all of these books. And I don't know if those are necessarily central themes just to Westerns. I think they have kind of filtered out from Westerns to popular culture generally, particularly probably popular culture aimed at men. So you see that kind of thing in like buddy cop movies all the time. The kind of things I've talked about there will be very familiar to anyone who's ever watched a Lethal Weapon movie, for example. So kind of strong individualism, teamwork, male friendships. It's become a mainstay of Hollywood, hasn't it? But it definitely feels like the Western is where not necessarily where it first started, but where it kind of matured into those kind of consistent themes that just people find entertaining and satisfying in the films and books that they consume. So that's the 10 books I did read. There's also a bunch of books I didn't read. So as per usual with me preparing for BookTube events, well, there's a few of these I already had. So the Elmore Leonard short story collection I already had, and this one, The Authentic Death of Henry Jones, I already had, and I didn't manage to get to either of those. This stack, I think pretty much all of these I bought for June on the Range and didn't manage to get through them. So I've got the Gene Hackman Western, Payback at Morning Peak. I've got the double bill of Richard Matheson. I've got another, so a Lone Star, which is a spin-off from Longarm. Got one of those. I've got a couple of UK Piccadilly Westerns. from the Gunslinger series, and then this stack of Louis L'Amour's as well. So I will definitely work my way through these. I can see myself maybe trying to read one Western a month aside from the Edge books, which I'm going to continue reading from July onwards. So yeah, I think I'm going to try and do a Western a month and gradually work my way through these, because I've enjoyed this month so much, and big thanks to Michael K. Vaughan for organising it. It's been a fantastic event. It's one I was definitely interested in taking part in as soon as he announced it, but I didn't think I'd enjoy it as much as I have. It's been absolutely fantastic. Right, now we come to that point in every video where I pick a random book from the shelves. So today, a book I have not read. It is Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind by Yuval Noah Harari. So this is a book that I pinched from work. So someone bought a load of books at work from a kind of work fund for people at work to read, and for us to educate ourselves about things that had some kind of relevance to work. And this was one of the books that was picked for that. The team that person was part of, and I was part of, later disbanded, and we stopped working in the building we were working, and so on and so forth. So I had borrowed this and started reading it, and have hung on to it because there wasn't anyone to give it back to. I need to continue with it because I've not read very much of it at all, but really interesting what I have read so far. And that was about 3 years ago, so I definitely need to start it again. But about kind of the evolution of human thinking and human culture and things like that. It's a very well thought of book, and based on what I've read of it so far, I can certainly understand why. So yeah, do let me know in the comments if you've read this. If you've got this far in the video, leave the brain emoji in the comments, so that I know you've seen this. Okay, well, as always, thank you very much for watching. Let me know if you read any of the Westerns. Let me know what you read for June on the Range and whether you enjoyed the event. Hopefully you enjoyed it as much as I did. As I said, I thought it was absolutely fantastic. So a very, very enjoyable month of reading for me. So tune in tomorrow and I'll be going through the non-Western books I read in June. But until then, hope you're safe and well. Hope you're reading good stuff, and I'll speak to you again very soon. Cheerio.